Three, two. Welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. As you guys know, I'm a history buff. I just love true stories. And when it comes to the Russian Revolution, I think there's so much that we can learn from it. I mean, when we analyze the Bolsheviks and how they came to power and what Lenin did, and then eventually what Stalin did. So I'm fascinated by this topic, and we have an expert, I believe, who knows quite a bit about Wall Street and the Russian Revolution, 1905 to 1925. The author is here today. Richard Spence goes by Rick Spence. Thanks so much for being here, man.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Well, let's start off with the genesis of this book. Why did you write this?
Okay, why did I write this book? Well, most of my, the academic training, in case somebody wants to know about that, is in modern Eastern Europe and in Russia. And if you're dealing with Russia, modern Russia, you're dealing with the Russian Revolution. So there's no way getting around that. That's the big event.
Which is 1917. It's when it began, right?
1970. Well, there was an earlier attempt at that in 1905. That's where the book really begins in 1905
Okay.
because there was a failed revolution in 1905. And then in 1917, here's a little detail that's often missed. There are two revolutions,
Hmm.
the March and the October. So this is the thing that a lot of people tend to believe is that the Bolsheviks, Lenin overthrew Tsar Nicholas II. Now, he had nothing to do with it. I mean, absolutely nothing.
That's what I thought. Just so you know.
And I used to tell students in my modern Russian history classes that is if you come out of this class knowing one thing, it's that Lenin didn't overthrow Tsar Nicholas. If you can't get that right, I'll flunk you. Anyway, I never had to do it, but that seemed to put the fear of God into them, and they would remember that one thing. So it's the usual type of thing that if you look at any sort of historical event, when you really begin to look at any kind of event, they never get simpler. No, that just doesn't happen. Things are always a bit more. I'm not sure complicated is the right word, but there's more to them very often. You can give a short version of the story, you can give the long version of the story. The long version is usually much more involved, has much more detail. And so if you're looking at 1917, there are two different revolutions. But here's something else. Neither one of them really were revolutions.
Hmm.
They were coups d'etats. So normally when we think of a revolution, you think of it's a large mass movement, right?
Yeah.
You've got crowds
The
of
American Revolution, right?
American revolutions, which
1776. Yes.
really wasn't a revolution either. But anyway, we'll go on. The term
Shit.
revolution, it was a war of national liberation. There you go. It was a colonial rebellion. That's what the American Revolution was. It was a rebellion by colonial subjects against their imperialist masters. You know, very modern if you think of it in that way. So let's put it this way: revolution is a term which is often used very figuratively, and I think in some ways sort of lightly in historical writing. So if you look at what happened in Russia in 1917, either in March or in October, it was a coup d'etat. That is, it was a kind of orchestrated change in leadership that really had little to do with any kind of mass involvement. Um, the Bolsheviks took power in October 1917, actually November by our modern calendar, um, through just sending in a few thousand armed adherents to take control of important buildings in the capital. That's
Hmm.
it. There wasn't even actually a battle that took place. So sometimes you'll see that the key event in the so-called October Revolution was the storming of the Winter Palace.
Wow.
In fact, the Soviets had huge glorified pictures of this, and it shows everything from armored cars and troops storming this building. That was the Winter Palace was the headquarters, the kind of last holdout of a thing called the Provisional Government. And the Provisional Government had actually been formed by the coup d'etat that had overthrown the czar 8 months earlier. So there's sort of roughly 8 months between these two coup d'etat, these two changes in power. So if anybody goes out there and you look up the storming of the Winter Palace, you can find these sort of kind of epic paintings that show a battle going on that never took place. Okay. That never happened. It's purely imaginary. The actual storming of the Winter Palace was not a pitched battle. It was mostly small groups of armed men infiltrating the place through its multiple doors and windows, and especially through the basement, which was open as well. And they basically just roamed around the place. There were a few scuffles with some cadets and women soldiers that were guarding the place, but mostly they went around arresting members of the former government, and that was it.
Wow.
That's,
Basically,
so
no shots fired is what you're saying.
there were some shots fired, but
Oh, okay.
it wasn't any kind of orchestrated. Um, it wasn't the huge conflagration which is shown, because that looks better. That the paintings always tend to make things. It's like retouching photos. There's a lot of retouching of historical events.
Of course. Winners write the history books, right? Is that how it goes? Yeah.
Always, always, never. That is always the case. So, well, here's a way to think of the whole aspect of history. So, and I would say this is coming from a professional historian, whatever that means. So I'll tell you how it really works. So one of the whole questions you can come up with is that what are historians for? Why do people like me exist? Why are there history departments? Why are people trained? Why do you go to school for years to get a PhD in history? If, as is generally assumed, we know it all already. I mean, hell, you can go onto Google, you can go onto YouTube and find a video on anything that ever happened in history, really, that you would want to. So why do historians exist? What do historians do? Well, the common view is that what historians do is that we just recite things, because somewhere it's in the Encyclopedia Britannica, or it's on YouTube, or it's in a giant black book somewhere in a library, that everything that ever happened has been written down. All history is recorded. So historians just sort of memorize a bunch of this stuff and repeat it. We're sort of storytellers in that case. That's kind of true, but well, okay. There's a number of fallacies there. One, all history is not written down. In fact, virtually none of it is. All the stuff that's ever happened in human history, only the most tiny, tiny, tiny little fraction of it was ever recorded. It's that way.
Yeah.
Just think of it. Think of all the billions of people who lived and died. How many can you actually name? Basically, most of the ones that you can name are a collection of psychopaths that pass for our leader.
Right.
Okay. Because if you tend to look at the general characteristic of human leadership, they tend to be psychopaths. So,
Yeah. The
they're
ones
usually
who
violent.
the
And
ones who stand out and remembered are usually nuts, right?
those are the
Is what
ones. I
you're saying.
mean, Napoleon, Alexander the Great, anybody who's got the name Great behind them, you know that there's a lot of bloodshed which is attached to that, because that's how
Yeah.
you get that name. So, what you have really is you don't have a recorded history. You have individual people and events that are remembered, often because they're startling or violent, and but you have relatively few facts. Okay, this is one of the things that I think people, particularly people today, get really confused about what a fact is. Okay, a fact is something that you can be absolutely sure, or as absolutely sure as we can be of anything happened. So I'll give you an example. It is a fact, an incontrovertible fact, we might argue, that World War II happened. Okay, so in 1939, at least in Europe, into 1945, there was this huge war that took place in Europe and in Asia. So World War II happened. That's not just made up. But now ask the next question. Why did it happen?
No.
Well, there. Okay, how many answers are you going to get to that question? All right.
I mean, the average person who doesn't know much will probably be able to say, well, just because of Hitler, right?
Hitler.
But
There you
they
go.
have no idea there's so much involved. Yeah, right.
Okay, that's it. The answer is to it is Hitler. One guy made all of this happen because he somehow hypnotized the Germans and made them all go crazy. By the way, I actually got that once as an answer in an essay question in an exam. Okay, but this was the explanation. Hitler hypnotized the Germans and made them all go crazy.
Jeez.
Now, so what is it now? Answer that an answer like that is, or any statement about why, is a narrative. So history is composed of narratives. So we've got a fact. There was this war that happened. A lot of things got blown up and a lot of people got killed. So let's try to figure out why it happened. Well, it could be this reason, or it could be this reason, or that might be important, or this might be important. You see, those things aren't facts. Those are opinions. They may be educated opinions. They may be well thought out opinions. They can be an opinion which is just no more than Hitler hypnotized the Germans and made them all go crazy. That's also an opinion. So facts are things of which we know, and they're based upon some kind of record. There's actually something in writing that you can go to, something from that period, and you can see it happening. Whereas the rest of it, history, as we know it, is essentially composed, I would say, of 90% opinion, about 10% fact, 90% opinion.
Or propaganda.
And well, that can be that. And opinion can be propaganda. So you see how many ways you can use different words for basically the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what historians do. There isn't a giant book that tells us everything and we just repeat it. Historians are supposed to be figuring out actually what's going on, because you have to keep going over this stuff. It's like the ruins of Pompeii. Every time you go up and dig out another mound, you find something new. You find something, and the next thing you find could change the whole narrative of what happened there. The narrative is the story. It's the script. So what history is composed of is a relatively few facts. These things happened, and then there's all the opinion that's put together in a narrative or to a script to explain that.
Yeah, you're basically a detective. That's what I look at it as.
Okay. Yep. So now the problem with narratives or scripts is that you can change them. So you can take the same small number of facts and you can construct different narratives around those to make a story out of it, to make some kind of sense out of it. Because see, that's another one of the sort of assumptions that we have. I mean, why are we studying this? Because we somehow think that it will make sense out of it, that we'll learn something from it, that that the story will instruct us in some particular way. Maybe it will. Maybe none of it makes any sense. Okay, maybe it's just a lot of random events that don't have any particular meaning to them beyond that. But, we don't really like that idea. We like the idea that our individual lives have meaning and that the world has meaning, because otherwise, what are we doing?
Well, I think if you're a great historian, you're a great predictor of the future. I may be wrong about that, but the more you understand history, everything is a cycle. And individuals who do not understand history are bound to repeat it, which means if you understand the Russian Revolution, you say, oh, wait, okay, so they took away people's guns. Okay, so they did that. Oh, they wanted more of a centralized government. Okay, so that's bad too. Okay, what else do they want? Oh, majority. Bolshevik means majority, right? So they want all about the majority. They kept saying that, right? So it's all about the majority. All right, well, all of these things, these are breadcrumbs. And the moment you see somebody around you doing the exact same thing that Lenin did, you should be like, this sounds very familiar to what happened in 1917, which led to millions of people dying in a war, right? So that's the way I look at it.
Well, there's a couple of things there. You didn't mention the fact that Bolsheviks does mean majority. Here's another thing let me get to. They were never a majority.
Yeah, right.
Okay. And their opposites, the sort of other Russian Marxists that they opposed, the Mensheviks, the minorities, well, they were actually the majority. Now here's the weird thing. The Mensheviks,
I didn't know that, to be honest.
They knew they were the majority. They could count. They knew that there were more of us than there were the Bolsheviks. So you want to figure out whether Mensheviks are losers Okay, why they don't? Because it wasn't really a movement. It was largely Menshevik is a sort of term used to describe not a political party, but people who essentially were Russian Marxists who opposed Lenin and his ideas. And Lenin had essentially glommed on to the title Bolshevik. Then actually, without going into the whole minutia of it, the split between Bolsheviks and Mensheviks goes back to about 1903.
Yeah,
And
that's
at
what I
that
figured.
time, there was a single Russian Marxist party. It's called the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party.
Yep. Karl Marx did that. What started it in, was it 1870s, somewhere in there, 1880s?
Well, this was Marx didn't start. Marx is a German,
Oh, okay. Karl
but
Marx, though. I
see,
thought Karl
that's
Marx.
one of the other things. People think that Karl Marx is a Russian. He's not a Russian. He's a German. Everything about Marxism is German. It's
Wow.
a completely German philosophy.
Wow. Didn't know that. Okay.
So,
Interesting.
why does a German philosophy end up in Russia? Well, there's the thing there. But there was an argument among Russian Marxists. But what do? They get together and talk and they argue. And so the question was, well, how is socialism going to develop? Where do we go from here? So Marx, back in the early 19th century, in his development of Marxism, basically argued that history is determined by economics. See, that was his narrative. Marx argued that economics, the ownership of things, wealth, was the key component in history. And those groups in a society that control wealth control the society. So, very simply, Marx said, if you go way back, you've got feudalism. Okay, wealth was based upon land, and people who owned land and owned the peasants ran everything, which they did. But then he argued feudalism gave way to capitalism. That is, it was a shift to manufacturing and trade and to the accumulation of money. And therefore, power passed from people who owned land, the old aristocratic class, to the new business class, the capitalist class, the people who had money. So the whole idea in Marxism is that there was going to be a continuing evolution. So the whole idea here was that history evolves. It's this concept we still have that history is heading in some sort of direction. Progress. See, things are getting better, bigger, or they're getting worse. Anyway, there's progress which is going on, which I think is an illusion, but we'll maybe come back to that. So Marx said that, okay, so the next stage is that capitalism, just like feudalism, is going to change into something else. And what it's going to change into eventually is into a communist society, which will be classless, in which everybody will have everything they want and contribute whatever it is that they can, from each according to his abilities to each according to their need. But the way to get there, the way that you get from capitalism to communism, is through socialism. So socialism is a process. Communism is the end result of that process. So socialism is how you build communism. So socialism would be this process of how you transition from a capitalist economy, think of it this way, an economy of robber barons out there robbing everybody, into one of equality. So, the whole idea of the simplest idea of communism would be the concept is that you would live in a world in which there is no master above and no servant below. And everybody gets what they want. And, which are you going to argue with that? Okay, that's okay. Now, the end result would be sounds quite benevolent in that way. That would be, but you're going to have to make certain sacrifices along the way. And it gets back to this question: how do we get to utopia from capitalism? How do we build the capitalism? Well, this is socialism. So the argument that these guys in 1903 are talking about is that, okay, well, what's that going to look like in Russia? Now, you got to keep in mind that in 1903 in Russia, it's still the Tsarist regime, which in 1903 was still an absolute monarchy, which means there was no parliament. There was no representative government of any kind. It was the Tsar.
Yeah.
He appointed the ministers, and he ruled as an absolute monarch. Whatever the czar said was law, and that was it. He
Wow.
can make a law about anything at any time. It had been that way for 300 years, and it kind of worked. But naturally, there was some argument about this. So you see, that creates a kind of problem. How do you create a political process in a country in which there is no political process?
Oh,
I mean, how would you do that? So, what most Russian Marxists like, and keep in mind, there are Marxists in Germany more than anywhere else, everywhere in the world by that time, there are Marxist parties. Everywhere you find something called a socialist party or a social democratic party, those are the Marxist parties. And they believe that they represent the people of the future, which is the working class, the proletariat. So the new sort of master class that's going to take over from the greedy capitalists are the workers. The workers will inherit the earth. And that will be sort of the whole process of socialism, the transition into this worker controlled society.
so capitalism, in my opinion, is equal opportunity, but communism is equal outcome. And so that's how they were able to sell it, right? Equal outcome. Everybody's equal.
It's, let's go back to, I'm not sure it's that much different now, but if you, the essence of capitalism, the way I define it, is that capitalism an economic process which is about making money. It's not about making things.
Mm.
Whatever things you create are just a thing to sell to acquire money. Capitalism is about the acquisition of wealth. It's about the creation of wealth. That's the product of capitalism.
Mm.
So whatever thing, whatever gadget, whatever thingamajig that you've invented and you're going to sell is with the goal of accumulating wealth.
The
And you
accrual
then,
of the accrual of capital based off of offering a product or a service.
yeah.
Right. Very
But
simple.
what you
Yeah.
do is that you then take that wealth and then you invest it in other things. Remember, this is why you look at the modern economy, it's dominated by huge hedge funds. People have just got huge amounts of money. And the thing is, we're going to invest it in different things. For what purpose? To make more money. Capitalism creates capital. That's what its ultimate product is, which means that in the end is the bottom line to it. Does this create more capital? It's not really whether it creates any kind of good. It's not whether or not the product actually works. It's whether or not it can be sold and whether it can create capital.
Mm.
So the idea is, and that's that's essentially why Lenin would later say, although apparently he never said it. That's another thing you find out is that people are supposedly said something, and then when you look around to it, you can never find where they said it. But there's a statement which, if he didn't, he should have. Let's put it this way: it said that in the end, the capitalists will sell us the rope that we use to hang them. In fact, the actual wording of it was supposedly is that in the end, there'll be a bidding war. They'll outbid each other to sell us the rope. And why will they do that? It's because their only interest is in making money. That's what they have to do. Like a shark. If you're not making money, you die. Okay. You can't function as a capitalist if you're not making money, because then you go out of business. So you always have to be looking for an opportunity to make money. And in the short run, okay, this guy might hang me with a rope, but in the meantime, I can make a good deal off of this.
But this
But
this creates division more so than anything else, right?
yeah,
The moment Lenin's out there saying you with the land are the culprit, you're the evil ones. Now, like you said, you have the proletariats against the aristocrats, and you have this war that could happen pretty easily. Sounds very similar to today, just so you know, from my
yep,
opinion.
not much has changed. Well, you go back and look at working conditions in the early 20th century or in much of the world today. Most of the time, they're not very good. Okay, people tend to work long hours for small amounts of money, and it was not an easy life. And therefore, the idea, and of course, what Marx would say is that the reason why you're not getting paid this is because your boss is taking the wealth that you produce.
Yes,
All
that's
right,
exactly
this
what
is the
he'd
whole
say.
idea. You're being ripped off. Okay, your boss is stealing the fruit of your labor. And, there's all kinds of ways. you can argue is that, well, the boss wouldn't be able to make any money if he didn't have us working for him. But on the other hand, you wouldn't be making any money at all in the factory if the boss hadn't built the factory in the first place. All right,
Correct.
there you go. Circle of life. So, but nonetheless, remember the Marxist socialists are based focused purely upon the proletariat. That's their people, and therefore the ideas of the proletariat are being ripped off. They are being exploited by their bosses, which they are. All right, I'm not trying to pretend it isn't. You're not going to you're going to pay the wages that is necessary to keep the workforce happy, and that's about it.
Man, there's so much happening. There's so much happening in the world at this time. We're talking about the gold standard being removed, the Federal
Yeah.
Reserve being created, World War I breaking out, which I truly believe is connected to the Federal Reserve being created. So, I mean, this is an insane time in the world, not just in Russia, right?
Oh no, there's all kinds. I mean, uh, you can look. Well, if you look at the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 in the U.S., which is actually closely connected to the election of Woodrow Wilson,
Yes.
a man
Really
who
close.
wouldn't have been president
Yes.
if there weren't three people in the race. Okay. This is when say the election of 1912 was one of those in which you actually had a third party candidate, Teddy Roosevelt, that was significant. So you still got the same two parties, you had the Democrats and the Republicans. Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican, William Howard Taft was a Republican, Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat. Woodrow Wilson on his own, had he faced either of those two opponents, would almost certainly have lost the election in 1912. But because Teddy Roosevelt basically couldn't bear not getting the presidential nomination, decided he was going to run as a third candidate, split the Republican vote, and elected Woodrow Wilson. Now, that itself is interesting. And one of the things you can find, the one thing I was looking at is that, well, who did Wall Street, who did the financials, the industrialists sort of back? Well, they backed everybody. I mean, they might have preferred one over the other, but this is one of the things that in extends into modern politics. So who does business, they might really like, well, put it in modern sense, maybe they like Biden more than Trump, or maybe it's the other way around. But the point is that when it comes to financing the campaign, you'll contribute to both.
Play both sides.
Because
How
regardless,
However, if you look
right?
at the donations, most of them went to Biden for a couple reasons,
Yeah,
but pretty
but you'll,
fascinating
but
how big
so
corporations
you can say that you did contribute
to both. Yep.
to the other side. And in a lot of cases, it's there was some years ago there was a fellow I knew he was actually looking at the sort of corporate funding in California elections, and these were mostly for assembly seats, state senate seats, etc. And he was kind of surprised to find in it is that you would have corporate donations, and you would find out, well, in some cases, why one would be slightly larger, they were actually very often contributing about the same amount of money to both campaigns. They were hedging, they were investing.
Of
See,
course.
and a candidate isn't it because this is the way everything they're investing in a candidate. So you just figure out, you just buy them.
Yeah, that's right.
That's all you do. You just buy them. And you can buy one or the other, and they're all absolutely dependent upon campaign financing. And let's put it this way, you don't finance a political campaign by going out and passing the hat. You depend upon those large corporate donations. So that's how you buy the candidates. And that's how you make them apply because we helped you get here. If we also were helping your opponent as well, and we'd be saying the same thing to him. But that's, that's business. It's the way these things work.
It becomes very man, out in the open of how they get funds for their campaign. I think right around the late teens, early 20s. I mean, there's a guy named Edward Bernays. Have you ever heard of him?
Yep.
He gets involved and he starts to help politicians, attract more attention, right? Be around the movie stars and the celebrities. And he's also responsible for writing the book. I think it's called Propaganda. He's known as
Propaganda.
father of
Okay.
propaganda. Hitler is actually quoted by saying that book has helped him. So you start to analyze how all of these leaders start to implement these psychological tricks to get them to where they want to go. It's fascinating.
And here's the interesting
Time
thing.
of life.
What actual business was Bernays in?
He was, I mean, he's the nephew of Sigmund Freud. So I think he really was a psychologist that became a
Yeah,
marketer, plain and simple.
advertising. Is
Advertising, that's
he's the
it. Yeah.
prophet of modern ad. I mean, one of the things that Bernays did, he gets credit for, is getting women to smoke more cigarettes.
Yes, of course.
They wanted to expand. You know,
Women
women didn't
empowerment.
smoke,
Women empowerment is the way he branded it. So when
right?
you see the women as the flappers with the cigarettes, that all goes back to his idea to make it very empowering. That's
Yes,
it.
we'll appeal to their ego. We'll also make it kind of sexy, and that will get women to smoke. So just think of all the cancer that he spread by doing that. But nevertheless, I mean that's not its point, you know.
Bacon in the
Whether
morning
it's healthy or
comes from
unhealthy.
Edward Bernays. Do you realize
Okay.
that? Edward Bernays is the guy that helped individuals have bacon and eggs in the morning because he got X amount of doctors paid for, by the way, to say it's the
Mhm.
healthiest thing you can have in the morning. Think about what he has done to human society.
There you go. And it's all in a book, which is essentially about advertising, but it's called propaganda. So when the
And
question
diamonds.
comes, what's the difference
Diamonds.
between advertising and propaganda? Nothing. Nothing. It's the same thing. They're just trying to
Yeah.
convince you to buy this stuff.
That's exactly right.
Um, and it's it's one of the things that struck me for one of the reasons. I'm retired now. I'm still doing a variety of things, but one of the things I probably watch way too much of are YouTube videos for a whole variety of things. Because I actually am occasionally amazed at the stuff which is out there. But the one thing, caught on to pretty quickly, is that it's all hype. All right. The titles of a video almost never actually corresponds to what you actually see, you know? And isn't that just the story of our life? Okay, we're always, this is the greatest toy ever. This is the greatest thing ever. You ever send off for something in the mail and then you actually get it and it's not the way it was portrayed?
I bought a Halloween mask. Is
There
not,
you go.
yeah,
Right.
100% different. Yep. What a lie.
Okay. So we get sold on the image of what this is supposed to be, as opposed to what the product will actually will turn out to be. Humans are suckers. We just keep doing the same thing. And you brought up the thing before about history repeating itself, and you then have to think of what is the common denominator in all human history. Humans.
Humans
That's the
and
common
their
denominator.
in power. Humans and their
And it's
want for
just
power.
and we do. There was a saying once in the Middle Ages, the French fought a whole series of wars with the English. Okay, we're going off on a real tangent here. 100 Years' War, which actually lasted longer than 100 years. But anyway, so the 100 Years' War between the French and the English, and if you look through that, you'll find out that the French just get beaten again and again and again. Okay, the English eventually lose the war, but they actually win most of the primary battles. And I don't remember who the historian was, but someone who had looked at that, he goes, the problem with the French throughout the whole case of this over a century of fighting and losing again and again and again was that they forgot nothing and they learned nothing.
It's a
They
great
just
way of putting it.
continued doing the same thing they had done before, convinced they would get a different result the next time. And that I always thought is really a kind of to me that if there's going to be an epitaph to the human race, that's a good contender for it.
Oh.
They forgot nothing and they learned nothing.
Mm.
And you don't get, so let's put it this way, over the 8,000 years of more of semi-recorded human history that we have, there is absolutely no evidence to me that human beings have gotten smarter. They haven't.
100%. They
Okay.
haven't,
Like at
right?
least
And actually, you could argue they've become more dumb, right? Because the average person has so much technology around them to keep them alive, safety nets, that they don't have to be as smart, which makes it very easy to see that people probably were way smarter even 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago.
they were probably certainly more skilled in certain ways because they had to be because you
Better health.
died if you
Yeah.
weren't. And it's the well, it's some of the basic reality through most of human history anywhere, and still in large parts of the world, is the rule of scarcity, which is that things, actual resources, are fairly scarce, food in particular. So let's take away the grocery stores and the corner markets. Let's take away all the prepackaged form food that we go in and we buy, and then you have to get it yourself. Faced with that kind of situation, much of the modern American population would die in a fairly short period of time because they have no idea how to feed themselves.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, you can grow food. Well, that food's going to take some time to grow, and you'll die before it's ready to go if you don't have anything to start with. And but that was the basic reality. I mean, that's the real world. And the real world is that to survive, you have to either grow plants under very adverse conditions where everything else is trying to eat them, or you have to eat animals who don't like to be eaten, and therefore will tend to run away from you. Um, this is the image that often people have. You go into the woods, there's just deer and elk standing around waiting to be shot. No, if you go out there, and I live in northern Idaho, and I'm surrounded by forests. I don't go hunting, but I go out there, and I know that there are bear, and that there are moose, and that there are elk, and there are deer, and all of these animals out. Rarely do you ever see one, and if you do, that's usually not necessarily a good thing. Okay, you don't really want to walk up on a large moose. Okay, it's better that you don't come up to them. But the point is because animals don't want to be eaten, and therefore they will stay away from you. And so it's very difficult to survive. So the basic reality in most of human history is that every day you had to figure out how to not starve to death. And that forced you to be very, very innovative, which is a different situation that I'm hungry, I'll just wander in and eat this stuff. And you ever want to wonder why so many modern Americans are overweight? Because they're just doing what they're programmed to do, which is eat food when it's around. Because there's this little voice inside you going, that may not be there. Once that's gone,
That's exactly right.
you don't know where it's going to be. So you better eat it while it's available.
Which you bring up a very good point. Why are we so bad at money and growing wealth? Because of the scarcity mindset. Hey, I can't invest it. I can't give it up. I can't give it away because this is all I have. So this scarcity mindset is inside of you for a reason. You need to save what you have to live another day. And you have to fight that. Like you said, it's a lot easier as time goes on to put down the food, knowing that I'll be eating later on today. I'll be eating tomorrow. I'm okay. I don't need it because of the abundance mindset. And so, yeah, that's a very good point that you are fighting human nature when you do that.
Yeah, I think
Anyways,
it's just uh,
I want to jump. I want
okay.
to
Go
jump
ahead.
into. We're gonna be running out of time. There's so much I want to
All
talk
right.
with you
Well,
about
you got to get
because
into the we get into Wall
well,
Street, the
well,
Russian
before,
Revolution, right? Right.
yeah, there's that, but you also have books on, you have a secret agent of Aleister Crowley and stuff like crazy stuff out there. And so I have looked at some of the things that he did through some YouTube videos, right? And I mean, in really wild life. And so there are people who've documented his life. And I believe we're in a time that good and evil is really being exposed, I think, in Hollywood and on TV and music. And I just think it's prevalent. There's a battle that's going on, good versus evil. And you're seeing people who do worship and follow Aleister Crowley's teachings coming out and doing certain things in politics and whatnot. So, what did you learn from his life? And are you seeing a trend that I'm seeing that it's becoming a little bit more socially acceptable to be like him?
Well, Aleister Crowley was a very difficult person to deal with. All right. One person who knew him said that, among other things, he would never do two things. He was kind of friends with him, and he goes, I'd never loan him money because you'll never get it back. And I also would never leave him alone with my children. And, and the main reason for that was that he would tell them scary stories. Now you see, I've been accused of the same thing because I have done that. Okay. I once so terrified two nephews by telling them what I thought wasn't really a scary story that their parents would never leave me alone with them again. So, I thought it was educational. Okay, I thought you needed to know these things. Um, Here again, there's the rule of hype. Aleister Crowley was not the person that is popularly believed. Okay, there is the Aleister Crowley, the kind of legend, the kind of, he's basically a fat bald man who's accused of being who's labeled the wickedest man in the world, the arch Satanist of the 20th century.
Yeah, devil worshiper 101.
Devil worshiper, and he really wasn't. Okay, which
Wow.
isn't to say that he was good. From his standpoint, I'm not sure that Crowley ever knew exactly what he was doing. All right, so Crowley was very much into what we now call the occult, and the occult is deals with spirits and magic. That's it. It's a complicated issue, but Crowley was looking for enlightenment. Now he believed that. Here's the essence. For what it's worth, if you let me get in a shameless plug here. In retirement, most of the work that I've done has been for a company called the Great Courses or Wondrium. They produce video courses, video programs at any number of subjects, and I've done a number of. Well, I've done the real history of secret societies, and I've most recently done secrets of the occult. So, in case anybody's is interested in, what's the occult? Well, it's 24 episodes. I go through the whole thing. And I don't explain everything because you can't, but I try to break it down in terms of what it is. And the essence of the occult, the hidden, which is all the world, the word occult means hidden. And what's hidden is that there is an entire world which is hidden.
A cabal?
No, it's just we live in a larger world than we can see. Remember, it's the same thing that every religion tells you as well. There's a larger world. There's a larger reality of which our human existence is only a part. All right? There's heaven and there's hell. They're all part of a reality, but we can't see them. There's all, there's angels and demons and all the rest of this, which we can't see, but we're then instructed they nevertheless exist. So there is a larger reality which exists beyond our senses,
Mm-hmm.
which you can easily prove. Now, I don't know how big it is, but are there, let's put it this way, can we see colors that our dogs can't see? Yeah, absolutely. Can they hear sounds that we can't hear? Yeah. So there's a world out there.
Yep.
I mean, we live in a different world. We live in a different reality than our pets because they don't even operate in the same time scale that we do.
Well,
Our time for your dog moves at 2/3 the pace that it does for us. So, see, you're living with you. This dog is sitting here right beside you, and you're living in parallel universes. Literally, you're
yeah.
not living in the same universe.
Well, even I've seen people believe two totally different things. And one person looks at money one way, another person looks at money another way. We're in two different worlds potentially at all times with other people. So I believe that 100%.
So there's a larger reality, and that's the hidden. That's what is occulted from us. And the purpose of occult techniques, of metaphysical philosophies, magical techniques, is to access that larger world. That's all you're trying to do. So you're trying to access the powers, the beings, whatever it exists in that larger world. But the point is, you really don't know what those are. And where I think Aleister Crowley probably went astray, as many others do, is that he tried to access those powers and he never quite realized what it was that he was dealing with. So here you've got a thing that occurs very frequently in, let's say, particularly in the history of religions, and you can find this very often. Muhammad, Joseph Smith, Joan of Arc, whoever you want to, all these people who say the angels appeared to them. Okay, an angel appeared to me and told me to do something, or said, "You are chosen." This type of thing. Hey, I'm an angel. God wants you to go proclaim His truth around the world. How many times has that happened? A lot, more than we know of, because most people who attempt that fail early on. Some don't. Now, here's the interesting question. How do you know that was an angel that told you to do that? Are you an expert on angels? No. So It was Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, his first encounter with the angel Gabriel, who shows up in a cave and just scares him, frightens him. I mean, it's nothing like sleeping in a cave at night and have some strange being come in and start yelling at you. Well, his first idea, the popular idea in Arabia at that time still is that this was a jinn, which was a kind of evil spirit, because if you went out to wild places, you might encounter the jinn. So, I mean, you've never really seen a jinn before, but that sort of seemed to be. So his first question is that, are you a jinn? No, I'm an angel of God. And he just believes him. And I mean, that could have been that maybe that was correct in some way. But again, humans are gullible. So the point is, you don't know who it is you're dealing with. And in Crowley's case, if you actually go through his writings, what you'll find is that he was never to the very end of his life really certain about what it was that he'd experienced. He didn't know, for instance, whether the mystical experiences he had were external things or internal things. That is, were these manifestations something that came from an outer reality, or was it just some kind of manifestation of my own psyche? And it's a question you can ask yourself, and people ask themselves in a lot of cases, is that, how much of this is real and how much of it I'm imagining? Or how much control do I actually have over these things? Because we can talk ourselves into all kinds of things.
He was the founder of the Satanic Temple, is that right?
No,
It was
Aleister
okay.
Crowley had nothing to do with Satanism.
Okay, because I just thought he had something to do with worshiping of the devil, and I thought it
No,
was
he considered himself a white magician. From Crowley's view, he was a good guy, and he was opposing all the bad guys, all of the black magicians that were out there.
got it. Okay, yeah, I don't
Now,
know much.
I don't know. Was he BSing us to some degree? I think he was kind of BSing himself one way or the other. He was making a distinction that wasn't always there. But no, there's nothing, there's no connection between what we would call Satanism and Aleister Crowley. There
Got
are
it.
modern
Okay.
Satanists who think there is, because they bought into the idea that, well, this is an evil guy, and therefore whatever he said must have to do with that. Uh
I do know Pink Floyd, one of the bandmates of Pink Floyd bought his house because he thought it was
the
what was
bullet
it?
scheme
Yeah.
in Scotland. They thought it was haunted. I mean,
Yeah, they thought it
Crowley
was
bought it
haunted, right? You know
because
about
somebody
that?
told him. Somebody
Fascinating.
told him it was haunted. Okay,
Right. Yeah.
and that's what people do. And Crowley did some things there that might have made it more haunted. If things are haunted, that's see. Then you can get people arguing that there's no such thing as ghosts, and therefore there's no such thing as hauntings. There's just people's overactive imagination. Where others will go, no, 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 all of this is absolutely real. And so you ask me, what should that do? I believe all of it, both at the same time. There
Well,
both are ghosts and there are no ghosts.
what is it? Ozzy Osbourne wrote a song, Mr. Crowley. I think it's about Alistair, right?
It is.
Alistair
It
Crowley, yeah.
is.
So
So he's had a tremendous amount of influence, particularly in rock music. He's influential, which I don't know what he would think of, to tell you the truth, because his actual tastes were probably didn't go in that direction. So he probably would be horrified and disgusted by the whole thing.
So
Uh,
we're running out of time
yeah,
though. I do got to ask you about the cabal. Do you believe in it? Is it there? Is there a secret society behind the politicians, a shadow government, if you will, that's pulling the strings? In my opinion, there's no doubt about it. So what do you think?
there's lots of them. Why would there only be one?
Yeah.
Okay. This is, if going back to Crowley for a minute, this is one of the things that Crowley contributed was his definition of what magic, which he spelled with a K on the end, is. I think it's worth keeping in mind. It was, I'm going to paraphrase, but I think I've got it about right. Magic is the art and science of causing change to occur in conformity with will. So, you ever hear people talk about manifesting things?
Yes.
With this. That's magic. All right. If you attempt to manifest something, you are trying to bring something in, you are trying to create a reality through force of will. Okay. Remember, if I imagine what I want, I will get it. No, you won't. But You
Law
might
of
have
attraction. Many
it's
people have written about this.
attraction,
Yes.
doing all these. But those are that's magic. But the idea in this is that you can, through the individual or collective application of will, that you can bend reality the way you want it, that it's malleable, that you can change it. Now, my point is that true or is that an illusion? I'd say at this point, it doesn't really matter because the point is people believe it and they attempt it.
Mm-hmm.
So once you begin to get it into your head that you can manifest things if you just do the right stuff in the right order, or you take the right attitude, or you get enough people to join you, then you're going to try to do it. But if you're trying to manifest one reality, you can bet that over here there's someone else who's trying to manifest another reality which is against your reality. So there's not one cabal which is trying to influence reality. There are many of them, and they're fighting each other. Why would there be only one? When do human beings ever join together and do? And if they ever join together in a group, they'll split. You see this in everything that people do. You'll form an organization. It's like the Russian Marxists.
Yeah, of
Okay,
course.
Marx, but then when they got together, they couldn't decide how to build socialism. So Lenin had the idea we need to build this little narrow vanguard party, a conspiratorial party. That's the essence of Bolshevism. The idea is that the way you advance socialism is through revolutionary conspiracy. Whereas the Mensheviks argued the way you do it is you organize the workers into a big party and they all go out and they vote in socialism at the ballot box. Two very different ways to essentially achieve the same kind of end.
So
Lenin
right
was
now, there are new world orders, multiple fighting each other, basically. Whether Rothschilds are on one against whoever Putin and people are going against another, you believe that there is always a battle, no doubt about it, and therefore one's good or maybe they're both bad, right? I mean, that's how you have to look at it.
they both think, well, it gets into this whole question about coming to the C word here, conspiracy. What do cabals do? They conspire. Conspiracy is a way of attaining your goals. And in some cases, you'll get the argument is that, well, conspiracy, conspiracy is just theories. People never conspire. That is just complete and total bullshit. Okay, excuse that, but that's what it is. People conspire in every single thing that they do. It is the natural way that we organize ourselves. Put it this way: you ever have a group of friends and you decided you were going to go, you're going to go do something, but then somebody said, "Do we have to bring Bob? You know, Bob's a party pooper. Bob's a pain in the ass. So let's just not tell Bob." And you all went somewhere and you ditched Bob. Well, what you did was you conspired against Bob because this was the way. So what is a conspiracy? A conspiracy are two or more people
Working together.
working together in secret to attain a common end. Notice I didn't say that end had to be evil, and I didn't say it had to be criminal. But the point is that you're working together in secret to attain an end that you want, and you're not involving other people in it. And for the simple reason that when you involve more, look, it's another basic rule. The more people you involve in any kind of process, the more complicated and unsuccessful it becomes. It's a lot easier to do it yourself.
Right. But then there are many people who buy into a certain party or system and they're tied to it financially. So therefore they can't stray. And so when you involve people like Edward Bernays and the father of propaganda and enough people buying into it, and then you instill enough fear and therefore you tie them financially with enough money, a lot of bad can happen from it. So anyways, regardless, we're going to be running out of time.
Okay.
I just want to really highlight your book because we kind of went into every different direction. He has many guys. I mean, the secrets of the occult, the real history of secret societies, the orphan conspiracies, documents from modern Russia, books on Aleister Crowley, but the one we talked about more so than anything else was Wall Street and the Russian Revolution, 1905 to 1925. And I guess that's the secret history is what you talk about of the 20th century.
Well,
So,
it has to do with the connections. Were there people in Wall Street in 1917 and through the 1920s who actively abetted and aided the development of the Soviet regime? Yes, they did. And why did they do it? Very simple reason. They made money off of it. And one of those people was Henry Ford. Henry Ford was one of the first American capitalists to jump on the bandwagon of selling trucks and tractors to the Bolsheviks. And why? Because that's what he did. And I think of, you talk about the crimes of Stalin in the 1930s and all of the collectivization and the tractors that made that possible. You know what those tractors were?
hmm.
They were licensed copies of Fordson tractors. The Ford Motor Company built the second largest automobile plant in the world in Moscow to manufacture under license. And so the whole thing is that Henry Ford, you get this idea, he did business with Hitler, he did business with Stalin. And
Yep.
why did he do business with either one of them? Was he a communist or a Nazi? No, because he made money off of it. That's what he did.
Fascinating. I could talk to you for hours. I do got to run because I got another one in 4 minutes. However,
Okay.
guys, check out his book. Obviously, a wealth of knowledge. And I'm telling you, Rick, this has been an honor. You website or social media channel that you recommend for anybody to check out?
No, not really.
Okay, so all right, so, guys, look him up. Richard Spence. There's many books on Amazon, so I don't want to
Yes,
just
you can
single
find my
one
books
out,
on
but
Amazon, and if you go to Wondrium or the Great Courses, you can find my various series there. Secrets of the Occult, Real History of Secret Societies, Crimes of the Century. And I have another one I'm working on now on Great Villains of History. But that'll
ooh,
be a year or two down the road.
I
All
love it.
right.
I love talking to historians. So please come back whenever that book comes out. Okay.
Whenever you would like to have me on, just let me know.
Message me. Okay, guys,
My pleasure.
check them out.
Okay.
Remember, $1 million book will lead to $1 million life. Right on.